Our top story tonight, some going down in November.
Wars, spending.
There has got to be something big a-brewing.
They're using geese to guard prisons in Brazil.
Does Biden know what
Immigration
Mexico
policies.
is? Would you scare Joe Biden? What are we laughing at?
I think Billy Mays was real.
I'm a world-class skeptic.
I don't know anything about Hunter Biden. I don't know who's big into cocaine and laptops. Why is that our problem?
Complete, absolute incompetence. Like, who funds the news? It's a freaking inside job, man. The entire world's a stage and everything's fake.
Welcome back, boys and girls, moms and dads, ladies and gentlemen, Gentiles, and, well, really just the Gentiles. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Veritas Road. Carson back here with John in the studio, and then we have Doc Brown from the Prometheus Lens podcast here with us. How's it going, sir?
Hey, I'm doing good, man. Thank you boys for having me.
Thank you for taking the time. Yeah. So real quick, folks, we've got a couple of shows coming up. I forgot to pull up the calendar. Join us live every Tuesday for Touch Me Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Central Time. We've got Juneteenth stream with Stax and Drew from Stax Farmstead coming up this Friday at 7
p.m.
This Friday the 19th.
Yep.
That'll be that may get us kicked off social media, but we have that coming up this Friday and then other stuff later, and we'll get to that after the show. Doc, where can all the people find you?
Anywhere you guys can consume content, Apple, Spotify, Spreaker, YouTube, same thing with the socials, all those things, man. If you just search Prometheus Lens podcast, you can find me there. You can find my book, The Epic of Esau, Birthright, and Seed War on Amazon. They got it in hard copy, digital copy. Oh, thank you, sir. And Audible. And it's me reading it in Audible, so there's no AI stuff. Or you can go to my website, PrometheusLensPodcast.com, and get a copy directly from me. I'll sign it for you, and I have custom bookmarks and sticker packs and that kind of thing that I send out with each one. So check any of those out, man. That'd be much appreciated.
Awesome. All right, well, we'll jump right into it. So I'm curious, John and I kind of grew up in the well, down here in the South, like the stereotypical, we were aggressively Church of Christ growing up, like the stereotypical super conservative church world. And it sounds like, having read the Epic of Esau, that's kind of the lens you came out of when you started writing this book. Can you talk a little bit about like that journey and what that looked like before we really get into the subject at hand?
What the journey of the book, or like my faith upbringing?
I guess like the faith upbringing, because I know like whether it's because down here in like Tennessee, the Southern Bible Belt, whether you're Southern Baptist, Methodist, Church of Christ, like there's some very staunch beliefs about the supernatural. There's some, and I guess the mentality around it is very country club like from a social perspective. If you want to address some of the topics we're going to get into with your book, if you want to talk about those, question those, mention those inside of a lot of respectable culture down here, you're putting a crosshair on your forehead, just even asking the question in a lot of places. And so I'm curious as to kind of how that journey started, because that's a brave thing to do in the, at least for me, like the religious culture we grew up around. And I imagine it's not too dissimilar, where you grew up as well.
Oh yeah, 100%. And my old man used to tell me, so there's a fine line between bravery and stupidity, and I tend to thread that needle quite often. But I grew up. Yeah, I grew up in East Tennessee my whole life, and I was raised, like missionary Southern Baptist, kind of.
Okay.
And but yeah, everything. I always loved the Bible. I always thought it was fascinating. I always loved history, but I was never a studious guy. But in church, I was, really interested as a young kid. I was the one actually paying attention and asking questions, and probably got on my Sunday school teacher's nerves. It got to the point, like once I was, 8-10 years old, I didn't want to go to Sunday school no more. I wanted to be in the Bible study class with the adults because they were talking about the good stuff,
Yeah.
But I grew up like that my whole life, but it was always Genesis 6 was a spiritual thing. Everything was spiritual. There was no literal. They were spiritually good people that bred with spiritually wicked people and then made really bad, wicked kings and rulers of earth. That's what Genesis 6 was. And
Right.
Esau was just poetic language. It was just a guy with a good beard.
Right.
Basically everything that we find cool, like giant, supernatural, was whitewashed and made really vanilla, so to speak. So yeah, but once I just got into YouTube and looking, this probably around 2012, I found people like Derek Gilbert, Trey Smith, Timothy Alberino, some of our favorites in this space. And honestly, like Trey Smith, I thought he was just a big heretic. I was like, this dude's full of shit.
Right.
At that point in my life, I hadn't been to church in like over a decade, but it's like I knew the Bible, or at least I thought I did.
Yeah.
Right.
Started looking through, man, and started finding it all, and started hearing these scholars, these people that's got the 10,000 plus hours, talking about this book in a totally different way that I grew up thinking that I knew so well. So my obsessive compulsive kicked in, and I had to know, and I kind of just went down this journey finding all this stuff. And yeah, I was quickly labeled a heretic and blackballed in some of the communities around here and looked at with a scornful eye, and
Right.
on serpent seed, and that was a huge bullseye crosshair on the back of my head, even in this space. That ultimately it cost me. There's plenty of big name shows out there in our sphere, high influential people that I talk to in private that tell me they agree with me. Okay,
Yeah.
but only in private.
Right.
They can't talk about it on their platforms. They can't write about it in their books because they know what it would do. So therefore, I kind of castrated myself, because I see a lot of my friends and people that in private tell me they agree with some of the stuff that I talk about and I write about, but they get to go on these big name shows and get all this exposure and get their ideas out there because they don't really talk about what they truly believe. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it has cost me.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense, because I know if, the world we grew up in, like if you walked into any kind of religious sphere and, talked about things like the serpent seed and that sort of thing, I mean, you were immediately full on John Wick excommunicado, like you're dead to them.
Yeah.
And so, I've always said, like, it takes a super brave, for one of the guys we've had on the show before, Tyler, he went through, I'm not going to say a similar experience, but an experience where he was questioning a lot of those things, in a very public way. Tyler, if you're listening, sorry I'm talking about you, but it takes a lot of bravery to do those things, like a ton of bravery. And I don't think a lot of people out in the sphere realize how much you're giving up when you're willing to ask those questions. And I mean, so that's, I think, a very admirable thing to see happen, to full on write a book and put that out there in front of people that are then going to maybe tell you they agree in private. But, it's a different story when you interact with their public personas. And so I guess, can we lay the groundwork for the Epic of Esau? Because, like, I know this whole story starts long before Esau is born in the Garden of Eden. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, because I always I heard, I can't remember exactly where I first heard it, but I've heard a few people that's influential to me echo the sentiment. One of them being Dr. Joy Pugh, but she used to always say, and her and other people, but if you want to know the ending of the story or have a proper understanding of the end of the story, then you must have a really firm grasp on the beginning, because it loops back, But how I got onto it was just a catty joke. I was with some friends, and it was our first podcast ever. It's been disbanded since then, but it was the Dig Bible podcast. And that was just me and my buddies fooling around, figuring out this whole thing a couple years ago. And I was fortunate enough to have Trey Smith on the show. And we were talking. He's like, "Oh, you're from East Tennessee. That's Bigfoot country. We should go Bigfoot hunting sometime."
All right.
And Esau, I mean, like I said, I grew up in church, heard the stories and stuff my whole life, but it's just that day, man, it was just different. For some reason, Genesis 25:25 popped into my head when he brought that up. And so I said, well, Trey, and I actually have that on recording. It's so cool. I can go back and see that moment and relive that moment. But I said, dude, I said, what about Esau? And he just kind of gets quiet, you know. He's like, we were talking about Bigfoot. How the hell did you bring up Esau? And I was like, I said, the first one come out red, covered in hair from head to toe like a hairy cloak. Do you think that, he might have been what we call a Bigfoot today? And we just kind of laughed, and didn't really think nothing about it. But that led to a couple weeks later, I had Gary Wayne on the show, and we were covering the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Right.
And once again, I'd read that story and heard about that story many times, but where I guess I had this new lens, we get to this character named Enkidu. He is the mighty hunter, just like Esau. He's covered in hair from head to toe like Esau, a man of the wilderness. I'm like, here's another hairy man, Sasquatch sounding guy.
Right.
And then that led me to finding the book of Jasher. And in there, they have this story that Nimrod was the mighty hunter. Esau was the mighty hunter, that Nimrod built up jealousy, hatred, envy against him and wanted to kill him. And they battled to the death. And he steals these, supernatural garments from the garden of God. And I was like, oh my gosh, man, this dude's got an interesting story. I have to find out, read through all these other extra biblical books and try to piece this guy's story together. And that's kind of how it all got started. It got me into reading Louis Ginsburg, Legends of the Jews, medieval commentaries and stuff from rabbis like Rashi. And then that got me into Jasher and into all these other extra biblical books. And basically this guy, it seemed as though someone had taken his story and just busted it into 1,000 pieces and scattered it through all these other scrolls and stuff. So I just went through and started, gathering the pieces and putting it into scripture. I mean, I found, some bones, some stuff not worth looking into or I didn't believe, but I found a lot of meat. And if that meat lined up with scripture, didn't contradict it, and just filled in, gaps to the story, I kept that. And I think I come up with a pretty good story of this really enigmatic character known as Esau.
Yeah, I mean, reading through your book, I'd never thought, because it's so little is mentioned about Esau in the canonical Bible, for lack of a better term. Like, it's, there's a little bit here and there, like, oh, hey, he was red, he was hairy, he was born first, and he was kind of a dick. Like, that's like 90% of what's mentioned about Esau. And the story you weave starts from the very beginning of creation in the garden with the Nachash, if I try to sound as Jewish as possible, and the serpent seed leading into the Genesis 6 story. And so I guess my first question, I think, John, you probably have some questions surrounding this. You want to start there with the serpent seed and all that? I know you had some questions about that.
Yeah. So like my exposure to this really started under Michael Heiser, is like, and I've always kind of taken his view of it's more of like this spiritual like metaphor almost, that like the serpent seed is all that align kind of with the rebellion of the serpent in the garden. Right. So I'm curious to like, how did you come to the point that like this was all literal instead of this kind of spiritual metaphor starting out?
And see, like with me is, I was growing up in church. Like I said, all the stories I'd heard were whitewashed, significantly once I got to look into them myself.
Yeah.
So I was guilty of doing that same thing again with people like Dr. Michael Heiser. Love that man. He's a genius. I've read everything he's wrote. But he was one of those guys that, laughed at serpent seed, said there was no water to be held in that cup. And I've never even heard him say it lines up spiritually. Everything I've heard, he just straight up denies it. He's like, no, that's just bunk. That's bogus. And so I took his word for it. I never looked into it. And then I had Dr. Joy Pugh on, and she's the one that kind of enlightened me to that. And I say it in the book, is it a physical seed? It could be. Is it a spiritual seed? Yes, it could be. Could it be both? Yes, it could be.
Right.
But with me, I say it in the book, I'm not dogmatic, but what I am dogmatic on is this is what they believed. whether it was, you
Yeah.
know, physical or spiritual or a little bit of both, because we can find different texts and thoughts and things like that that can back both theories, basically. So I think it's a little bit of both, because we know Paul talks about later in the New Testament, he says that talks about the grafting in, you know, that the Gentiles were grafted in, and by us accepting through faith, we are now of the seed of Abraham.
Yeah.
So you get that, you know, seed talk even with the spiritual side. So I mean, I think it's both, but to me, how I got there was when Dr. Joy Pugh laid all that stuff out, and how it got me back there was when I started reading through some of those extra biblical texts. They paint Esau as a serpent seed.
Right.
They say that he had a guardian angel. His guardian angel was Samael.
Right.
That he even had a serpent's branding, and he comes out covered in all this hair. And I tell people, it's like, when you read that, the birth of Esau, to me, you're not going to get a more clear Polaroid picture of Genesis 3:15, because what happens, he curses her seed and the serpent's seed. He's going to put enmity between the two.
Right.
One would bruise one's head, one would bruise the other's heel, you know, all this kind of imagery. And then what happens? You got to remember, this is a scroll, you know, didn't have chapters and verses. It's just the ancient reader read about the curse in the garden. A few verses later, you get to the birth of Esau, and the angel says, there's two peoples, two nations in your womb. They battle together. There's enmity there. Esau comes out first. You can imagine easily his foot pushing on the head, bruising the head. Jacob is said to be clutching the heel, bruising the heel. I don't think to the ancient reader, when they read that, it wouldn't have been lost to them that this is referring to that curse in the garden. But when she broke that down to me, for me, and it could have been, I even half jokingly say this, it could have been her Southern accent that got me, that reminded me of my good sweet grandma, you know. But she was like, well, Justin, she said, look what happened. She said, they partake of this tree. And she says, and in the English, it says they eat. And she said, if you look at that word in Hebrew, she said that word can translate to other definitions and other meanings. She said, and a lot of times that same word is translated to enjoys. She said, so they partook of this tree and they enjoyed. And then she goes to her husband, and he too enjoys. She said, we weren't allowed to eat cookies as a kid before supper. She said, but if we would sneak and steal them and our mother caught us, she said the first thing we would do is we would cover our mouth, because that's where the sin was. That's what we wanted to hide, what we were ashamed of, where the wrong was being committed. She said, so after they partake of this tree, she said, they covered their sexual reproductive organs. And like I said, I was fully on board with Mike Heiser. And when I had her on and she started talking about this, I was like, oh my God, here we go. Crazy serpent seed stuff, you know. But I sit back and I listened, and she totally just rocked my world, fellas. Because she said that, you know, she said they cover their sexual reproductive organs. And she said, in the Bible, God's curses always correlate to the crime. And she said, let's take a look at the curses. She said, the woman's cursed to have painful menstruations. She's cursed. Her seed is cursed. Not only is her seed cursed, the serpent's seed is cursed. So there's two seeds involved here. And she said, painful childbearing. She said, all these curses have to do with sexual reproduction. She said, and then look at the etymology of the names. She says, Cain, the etymology of his name means acquired, because he was acquired by Adam. He wasn't really Adam's. She said, what loving mother would name their child acquired? And then the other one, Abel, she said the etymology of his name means the breath. She said, because like his father was a lifeless being until the breath of life was given to him. So he was named after his father. And she said, and then when they're kicked out of the garden, she said, there sure is enmity between those two seeds, all right, because one kills the other. And then she said, then Seth is born. She said, if you look at the etymology of his name, she said, his name means the replacement, because he was replacing Adam's only son. And she said, if there wasn't two seeds, why was God putting enmity between her seed and the serpent's seed if he didn't have a seed? Why did they go through tracking all these genealogies and showing you that Christ came from the pure bloodline? She said, because obviously there was a corrupt one.
Yeah.
So she blew my mind, really.
That that makes complete and total sense, and I can see why it would be such a groundbreaking thing for you at the time, because it was for me the first time I ever heard that concept, and that was one of the things that, like, from a personal perspective, I always struggled a lot with, because if you're growing up in a world where you're told, oh, God's this nice but benevolent, loving figure, and he's also like, hey, how about we go murder a bunch of women, children, and baby calves? Those two things don't make a ton of sense, especially when it comes to, like, cursing Cain and all of his progeny, right? The production of this, like, serpent seed line to essentially, like, eternal damnation, more or less. It only makes sense, I think, in light of the way you're describing it, in light of, Eve had some kind of, sexy time with whatever alleged serpent, Nachash, adversary, whatever you want to call it, was walking through the garden. To me, it only makes sense in light of that. It never really made rational sense to me as a kid growing up, thinking, oh, well, they just ate some fruit, and then Cain just turned out to be an ass, and things just went downhill from there. That never made rational sense to me.
I love that Southern Karen voice, by the way.
That's what I'm here for. I've worked in the restaurant industry for a long time, so I heard so many of those, and they all sound the same. I don't know why they all sound the same, but they all sound the same. But yeah, I mean, that for me, that makes that entire storyline make so much more sense. Because why curse Cain to such a heavy? I get it, he kills his brother. What a dick, right? But why curse him and his entire bloodline to such a heavy degree, unless they're tainted on some fundamental level?
Yeah. And the thing is, too, is I tell people in the book, I'm not, because there are people that take ideas and bend them and twist them to their own, means or end goals.
Right.
You can say that the party took like a theology similar to the serpent seed and said, oh, there's this subhuman race, they're not really human, wipe them all out. You get a lot of even Southern Baptists and religious people that are kind of racist will adopt the serpent seed and say, oh, well, they're a subhuman race, the KKK, all these people that will take this idea and twist it. But I tell people, I'm a serpent seed guy, I think it's real. But if we believe that Cain was the first one, well, when Cain has these thoughts of killing his brother, God comes to him and reasons with him. If you remember, he says, if you do bad, will you not, be unsuccessful? If you do well, will you not succeed? So therefore, you have these, inclinations and these desires in your heart that are not yours. He says, you must rule over them.
Yeah.
So as I tell people, I don't think the blood is what condemns them.
Right.
It might help. If you have a bunch of people in your family that are alcoholics, you're going to be more prone to be an alcoholic, but that you're not doomed to be an alcoholic. You have the choice.
Right.
So therefore, Cain, just because he was of the serpent doesn't mean he was condemned, to hell and never had a shot at salvation or being a good person. No, he had a choice because God reasons with him before he kills his brother. So I'm not one of those type serpent seed guys either, but it opens up so much more stuff once you do that. Like you had mentioned, there's so many verses in the Bible that allude to this.
Right.
John comes right out and says, Cain was of the wicked one. He just says it outright. You have Jesus talking about parables of wheat and tares. And he says, oh, you sown good seed, but behold, there's wheat or tares growing amongst the wheat. And what does he say? He says, the enemy has done this in my absence, sown his seed. So Jesus is even talking about in his parables. He goes to the Pharisees. He compares them to what? a brood of vipers, of snakes.
Mhm.
And he says, you are of your father, the devil, who was a murderer from the beginning. First was Cain. So Cain was the context. But then they reply with, no, we were not born of fornication like Cain was.
Right.
We have but one Father. So there's so many things in Paul in it was 2 Corinthians, I think chapter 11. That was the final nail in the coffin for me, because he's talking to the people and he says, I have a righteous jealousy for you. He said, I prepared you as what? A chaste virgin. So it's a sexual context. He says, I prepared you as a chaste virgin, but I am afraid that you will be beguiled as Eve was beguiled by that ancient twisting serpent.
Right.
I was like, oh my gosh, okay, yeah, that confirms it. But and I'll throw this out because I know there'll be somebody in the comment section that don't watch the show but just sees the headlines or hears a snippet and comes in with this one verse, because this is the one verse anybody ever, it's all they have, and it's honestly interpreted wrong and translated wrong. Everybody throws up Genesis 4. And that's, I can throw up all this evidence that, like you even said, it makes so much more sense than what we've been taught. But they'll throw up this one verse and they think that one verse kills the 20 that you just laid out. It don't work like that, folks. Yeah. But that verse, it says it's at the birth of the children. And it says that Adam knew his wife and she bore Cain, and then again bore Abel. And they're like, oh, well, there you go. It says Adam knew his wife and she bore Cain. Therefore, your serpent seed theory is dead. And it's like, well, hold up a minute. Okay. So it says that that this birth here, bore just means deliver. So the purpose of that story is telling you that they were twins. She bore Cain, then again bore Abel. So one seed was already sown in the garden. Adam just sown another seed. And this is medically recorded. It's called hypersuperfunctation or something like that. It's basically you can have twins, but two separate fathers. It's been documented over and over again. It's scientifically proven that it can be done. But then she makes this special proclamation only for Cain, not for Abel. And she says, I have acquired, and you got to remember, that's the root meaning of Cain's name, acquired. She said, I have acquired this man through the help of the Lord. And English, the Lord, all caps, is substituted for the divine name, Yod He Vav He.
Right.
Well, I was always told that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. Right. Well, Moses had the divine name.
Right. Exodus
he was
6.
The first one to get it. Yeah. So if he was writing these books, I believe he would have been using the divine name to which he had.
Right.
So when you read that, though, it's everything up until chapter 4 is Elohim.
Right.
It says, in the beginning, the Elohim created the heavens and the earth. And the Elohim said, let us make man in our image. So that word Elohim can be referring to Yahweh, but it can also be plural, talking about the divine council.
Right.
So I tell people, I'm like, it's funny that if I was writing a book and I'm like, Johnny woke up today, took a shower, brushed his teeth, and went to work. He came home, went to sleep to do it all over again. But the next day, now the name changes. Justin gets up just like he did yesterday and takes a shower and brushes his teeth and heads to work. You're like, whoa, why did the main character's name change in the middle of the story? So there's some people that threw out this same question, and they come up with this thing they called the documentary hypothesis. And they believe that there was already a written record of their creation and some other stories, or in the very least, well-established oral traditions.
Sure.
And that Moses was a documentarian. he gathered all those either oral stories or already written down stories and compiled them into one narrative, kind of like the Council of Nicaea did in 325. To me, that makes more sense, and that explains the name change. So that first name change there in this verse we're talking about signals to me that this is either where Moses picked up the story because he had the divine name, or it was his first edit. So to me, I think the original said, I have acquired this man through the help of the Elohim.
Right.
Well, which Elohim?
Yeah, that makes a
Yeah.
big difference.
I think it's the Nachash.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's like first and foremost, it's like obviously the divine name being in there is a little bit, if you take it on face value, a contradiction with what is it, Exodus 6 when it's given to Moses, because Yahweh tells Moses that like you're the first to know me by this, right? So that makes a ton of sense there. My question also, because it's like I remember when you mentioned that in the book, I wrote down Genesis 4:26, the end of that passage, right? When it's talking about the line of Seth, because it's like that passage is used by a lot of people who promote the sons of Seth theory in Genesis 6, where because it says people began to call in the name of the Lord at that time, the name of Yahweh. That's the good line of Seth versus the evil line of Cain, right? That's like their first support. But could that also be what's happening there where it says at the end, and people began to call on the name of the Lord, right? Could that also be translated to Elohim? People began to call on Elohim, plural, right? Leaning into now going into the Genesis 6 event. Like that's an association with the fall, not necessarily an association with Seth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. And I tell people too, because a lot of people, it blows my mind how a lot of people in this space are all about Genesis 6.
Right.
Okay, Genesis 6. The angels came down and bred with the daughters of men and made a hybrid race.
Mhm.
Why do people lose their minds when you say it happened in the garden?
That's a fair point.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
everybody's super chill about a bunch of giants coming from a hybrid race in Genesis 6, but you mentioned it before that. They lose their shit. You're right.
Yeah, and the thing is too is like even the book of Enoch, the book of the Watchers, in there it says about the fallen angels. It says that they became subject to the Nachash.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I tell people, I'm like, to me, that signals that he was like, hey, let me show you what I did. Okay,
Right.
let me show you. I done this already, and let me show you how this works.
Right.
So he kind of was the blueprint. He's the one that showed him how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like that makes so much sense to me, because it's like you look at the punishment that was given to the Nahash and the punishment that was given to the Watchers. I've always kind of seen them as kind of similar, especially in context that it's almost the opposite of what they wanted, right? The Watchers wanted like the freedom of the flesh with humans, right? So they're bound in a pit for eternity with no freedom, right? The Nahash, when you look in, Isaiah chapter 14, he wants to be in the standing of God, right? Wants to be in the standing of heaven, right? So he's banished to spend eternity ruling over Sheol, right? So it's like the punishments almost fit, in my opinion, like almost exactly, right? And they're very similar. So it's like that concept makes so much sense to me.
Yeah, and so that's why I think that I talk about the book. I think that's why the angel came down and told Rebecca, two nations, two peoples in your room, they battle amongst each other. Hey, I know it's customary for the eldest to rule, but in this situation, no, the youngest is going to rule. Because, like I said, I'm not dogmatic. Whether Esau was physically a serpent seed or spiritually a serpent seed, either way, the Bible goes out of its way to make him look wild. They paint him to look like all the fertility gods of the people of the time.
Right.
They worship Samquain, Pan, all these different gods that were fertility gods. They were covered in hair. They were wild men.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the devil tried to steal the birthright It's like, okay, I'm going to make sure mine comes out first, and like
Yeah.
kind of spun them in the womb. But then the angel's like, we know what's happening here. Okay, the second one is going to be the one to rule.
Yeah.
And so I say that in the book, could it be that Esau was just this terribly wicked person, and the writers just went above and beyond out of their way to make him look evil as a serpent seed? Yes, that's a possibility. We have to be theologically honest here. But I just try to show you what the ancient people thought, what the ancient people believed, and leave the cards on the table for those to check them and read them and form their own opinions,
Mm-hmm.
And that's another massive thing, talking about like the Elohim and some of the other like almost godlike figures in the Bible, is, a lot of people, especially in the religious sphere these days, talk about the Jews and the Israelites like this group of people that just worship God. And I think you make this point in the book as well. Like this was a super polytheistic nation of people, like with a bunch of different gods that they worshipped. And I'm curious because in Exodus, when God hands down the Ten Commandments, he doesn't say, and this is something that's bothered me for a hot minute now, so I'm curious to get your take on this. He doesn't say, don't have any other gods. He doesn't say no other gods exist. He says, don't have any other gods before me. So he's not even necessarily banning them from some level of polytheism. He's just saying, hey, by the way, I'm the best one. Don't have any others that you respect or revere above me. And then at the same time, we have this scene, I can't remember where this is, but where he talks about essentially like, hey, you're going to kill a goat and sacrifice it to me, and then you're going to release one almost as like a tribute or a gift to Azazel. And so I'm like, is God in some way, and this sounds borderline sacrilegious, but is God in some way condoning some level of polytheism here? Because Azazel, if you read like Enoch, is this like horrible figure that comes down and teaches man all this stuff we're not supposed to know. It's like, why are we releasing a goat into the wilderness from essentially to like an antichrist figure? That seems very strange to me.
Yeah. Well, see, I see it as foreshadowings. I see that God meets us where we're at. And I say this to some people, and it gets some people upset that are, dug in real deep, like far as like flat earth theory. People will throw up to me, well, how can you be a Christian and read the Bible and it clearly depicts a flat stationary plane? And I'm like, no, I'm not arguing with you. I think it does depict a flat stationary plane. But I tell them, I believe, once again, that God meets us where we're at. These were people that believed in a flat moving plane, non-moving stationary plane, a flat earth model. So he was like, okay, I'm going to talk to them in a language they understand and meet them where they're at, because that's the shape of the place they're living in is not important. What's important is the coming Messiah and their salvation and how to get back home to me. That's what I'm going to focus on. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I tell people, it's like when you're a little kid, you ask your parents, where do babies come from? Well, some will say, oh, well, when a man loves a woman, they kiss and a baby is born, or a stork drops it off at the door. You know what I mean? Your parents tell you something to give you the general idea of the question you're asking, but it's not super scientifically accurate. They're explaining it to you in a very dumbed down way that you can understand the main gist. Doesn't make them liars. No, they explain something very complex, very simplified so you could understand it. And I tell them that's my opinion is what was going on there. God was meeting them where they were. So like you had mentioned, they were very polytheistic people that occasionally went monotheistic.
Right. Yeah.
So he's like, okay, I'm going to meet them where they're at. And, because ultimately I'm going to get them where I want them to be, but I'm going to use these as teaching tools. So just as Azazel, he was the one that he said, ascribe all sin. And that's what they were doing. They were honoring God's word because they were casting all their sins and stuff onto this scapegoat, this Azazel goat, and throwing it out into the wilderness. But basically, I just see that as the ultimate foreshadowing of the coming Christ, who we were going to really cast all of our sins upon, and he was going to be the Redeemer of the world. And I even say that even kind of like with some of the polytheistic religions, how a lot of people will throw up a lot of these, they call them corn kings, dying and resurrecting gods like Mithras, like Adonis, all these other gods throughout the world that mirror and sound a lot like Christ. And people say, oh, Christianity just copied all these other ones. Well, no, I believe, it says that the angels came down first. They were kicked out. So, of course, you're going to get their version, their perverted version of the story correct. And just like the cross, Paul said if they would have known by killing the Lord of glory, they would have sealed their faith. They never would have done it. But he allowed them to shoot themselves in the foot. So I think that's kind of what happened here. These gods come down. They knew a little bit of the plan, but they didn't know the whole plan. So they're like, oh, we'll throw out different versions of this plan to try to discredit him when he comes. But God allowed it to happen because ultimately, just like Paul at Mars Hill, oh, you got this unknown God here. I know who that is. He met them where they were at. So ultimately, it shot them in the foot because all these other cultures around the world, when they heard the story of Christ, they were like, this sounds familiar. Yes, I know this story. And they were more prone to accept it. So I think he masterfully allowed them to do what they thought was a deception, but ultimately shot them in the foot.
Oof, that's a super rational explanation for that. Yeah. Because I think, and maybe part of my difficulty with that concept is simply how much it seems like, at least for me, modern religious culture likes to deny the supernatural seeming element of a lot of biblical and historical text. And so, the way they paint, ancient Israel is this monotheistic culture. They don't like to acknowledge beings like Azazel being addressed in biblical text. They like to ignore books like Enoch and Jubilees and all that good stuff. And so I still, when I read over things like that, I guess because of the worldview that I had up until I was probably like 25, 26, have a difficult time understanding, well, why the hell are we doing it this way? This doesn't make any sense. Why are we sending a goat? But that makes a lot of rational sense. Like, hey, we're just meeting people where they are, and God does that historically throughout the entirety of the Bible. Is he doesn't ask anything insane out of the people he's shepherding. I mentioned this thought to John. Hopefully we'll do a show on it at some point in the near future, but I was like, does God ask for blind faith from his people? And with the exception of a few like weird one-offs like Abraham and Isaac, it really doesn't seem like he does. He presents himself as this, very, very loving, very conscious shepherd, shows people like, hey, you can entrust yourself, to me, and then asks them to follow him once he's established that trust and that faith, but not before.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree. And it's like, I can't remember who said it, but I think it was in Romans, but it said, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but even the bad things, that the devil means for harm, God turns for the good for all those who love him. And I think that these fallen gods are no different. Just like Paul going to Rome, he could easily just went up there and said, oh, you guys are dumb. You got it all wrong. There's only one God, and beat him over the head. Well, of course, he knew they were going to reject him. They weren't going to listen to nothing he had to say if he come in just pointing fingers, telling them how wrong they were. And that's something I think a lot of modern Christians get wrong.
Right.
They'll encounter someone that has a different belief than them, and they get all self-righteous and put on that armor of God and that sword, and they go out to conquer and vanquish and defend God. And God don't need your defense. He commands you to be a good image bearer. And that means showing love and kindness to other people and meet them where they are and plant the seed. And then you will get them to where they need to be. But no, Paul rolled up like, hey, y'all are smart people. And you got this figured out, got that figured out. And man, you guys are so great. I love you guys. But I notice a statue to an unknown God. I am here to tell you, I know who that unknown God is, but he's the supreme one. And he related to them, met them where they were, and reasoned with them. And what did they do? They invited him back. They said, we'd like to hear more about this. Imagine if he'd went in like a modern day, Pharisee, Karen or Chris, Terry.
Right.
You guys are wrong. You need Jesus. You're going to hell. The good book says.
It's exactly accurate.
You're not going to get any crops out of that. You're just going to be beating the ground in and packing it so tight that a seed will never take.
Yeah. 100%. That's a good Carrie accent. I like that. That's solid. Yeah, well done.
And like that's such an important concept to understand, because it's like I always say this is like when you're looking at the Bible and you're reading, first and foremost, it's ancient text, and there were no atheists in the ancient world, right? So it's like all of these people are, they're believing in other gods, and in all honesty, in my opinion, it's because they're encountering other gods. They're encountering, like, I always think of, like, the first one that comes to my mind is Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Whereas, like, you have what is like 300 guys who are like slitting their wrists and doing all this crazy crap, right? In this, like, ritual. And like, they wouldn't be doing that if they were doing that to a rock and getting nothing out of it. Like, there's clearly like some type of interaction that's going on. And like, it kind of paints all of this into context, is that, like, Yahweh is identifying himself out of all of that as unique, right? And you have to look at it that way. It's like, hey, why is, the God of the Bible unique out of all of this, and understand that. And it makes so much more sense to me that way.
Dude, that's a really good point, because we think of all these people as functionally, like, the way a lot of people will describe folks from biblical text specifically, like the prophets of Baal, is like, look at these morons just slitting their wrists over some statue, which is just such a ridiculous way to look at that. Like, who's gonna have that level of commitment to a rock?
Yeah, and
Iran,
they've seen something or experienced something. That's why I tell people that they were murdering their children, and burning them on the altars of Baal for a reason.
Right.
Nobody would do those type of extreme things if there wasn't a payoff. They were getting payoffs. They were getting experiences. They were seeing miracles and or magic, whatever, verbiage you want to attach to it. But they were seeing these other, lowercase g gods, who God calls gods in his own words. They were experiencing it. And just like you guys, I was that guy in church when I was a kid reading, God just done all the plagues, brought his people out of Egypt. And then next thing you know, they're erecting this gold altar. I'm like, you freaking idiots. What the hell is wrong with you? But it's like, they were seeing stuff. That's why.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. And I think we got one more pre-flood question before we move on to Esau. And I don't want to get too off topic, but I think that we're finding ourselves in the age where this starts to bite people in the ass, because now we're like kind of brushing up against this whole age of disclosure and like some spiritual implications of that, after like modern religious people have been completely denying the existence of the supernatural, the true nature of, God and all of that. And so I think all of that denial of this sort of thing is finally kind of coming to a head, so to speak, now.
Yeah, and I have one more question before we move on, because it's like the biggest thing that I noticed for me when I started to get exposure to all of this was, like, for me, it was the name of God. That was what kind of like made me realize like what the Bible actually is saying, because it's like you were talking about how in Genesis, where it's like, hey, maybe this shouldn't be Elohim, it should be Yahweh. But if you're reading that as an English reader, you don't notice a difference, right? Because it's like God and Lord, like all of that in our mind kind of, gets jumbled together, right? But like God's name is like how he identifies his uniqueness. And I'm curious to, like, because that's been taken out of the English Bible, and I guess a lot of the other translations as well, because that's not relatively that modern. Like, do you think that that's been like having a massive effect on all of that, right? Effect on like people not really being able to grasp some of the concepts that we talked about?
I think it's a major role. And if you talk to some, like Jewish scholars, they say, oh, well, because you got two camps. You got the extreme conspiracy theorists that say, oh, God's name's been removed. I can't remember, but it's like 1,700 times or something in the Bible. Right. And when they say that at face value, it's correct. And it can cause people to get paranoid and say, oh, well, then the Bible's corrupt. Throw it away. It ain't worth a damn. No. But then you got some on the other side that say, oh, well, it's because the Jewish people had so much reverence for the name of God that they couldn't say it. Only the high priest on Yom Kippur in the holiest of holies could recite the divine name of God. So therefore, out of respect, excuse me, and reverence for the name, they changed it to Lord.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think what it boils down to is just like, Dr. Michael Heiser says, this is an ancient text written to ancient people.
Mm-hmm.
So if we are going to read and study this thing, and if we're serious about it, we want to know what they're really trying to tell us and say, we need to put our mindset in the mindset of the people of the time that it was written, who it was written to, and we need to go back to the original languages.
Yeah.
Because it was translated, yes, but it was translated with people with modern eyes, modern thinking. So that's why I think it's so important. That's why he says, something doesn't have to be divine inspired to be important for historical and cultural context. So that's why I think, to me, it's so important to read these other non-canonical books, why it's so important to read the other myths and legends of the people of that time, why it's important to read Louis Ginsburg, Legends of the Jews, and all these other things that are non-canonical, because it gives you a better glimpse into the mind of the people of that time. Because just like us today, if we got, let's say we got into Bill and Ted's excellent time machine and went back to biblical times, and we come out and there's some guy, in a turban or a toga or whatever, and
Right.
they're like, hey, and they start going off with something, and then we're like, whoa, hold up, buddy, you just come out of left field. And they're like, oh, you're talking about the pasture over here? What comes out of the field? No. They don't understand what the hell we're talking about, because they don't know our culture. They don't know our, coins of phrase and things like that. And I think that's what's happening to us. We have lost the original story and connection with these ancient people. So I think that's why it's so important that we do that if we want to truly understand what they're trying to tell us in this ancient text.
100%. And it's the arrogance that comes along with the lack of cultural understanding. I think for most of us, myself, like when you listen to some guy who went to school for 4 years to be a preacher and he tells you he knows everything, it's that lack of cultural understanding along with like this hubris that I have divine knowledge that I'm going to impart to you with absolutely no context, no nothing. I'm just going to tell you I know what's what. And I mean, I think that probably does drive people very far off the path. So one question before we get on to like Esau proper. You were talking about a good bit about in the book about like the giants and the Nephilim, and then we have the flood, right? When all these sons of bitches were murdered, drowned. And then we have the Rephaim that come up after the flood, these giants that sprung up seemingly out of nowhere. And so the question is, where did these people come from? I know there are a couple of theories on that, maybe Ham or one of his wives was some kind of halvesy. What's your prevailing thought on how we got these genetic hybrids essentially after they were all allegedly wiped out in the flood?
Yeah. Well, see, me, and that's what I tell people, I'm a person, I don't think it's ever so neat and clean. A lot of people say, oh, it's this, or the other camp, oh, no, it's that. In my experience, most of the time, it's a mixture. It's a smorgasbord of this and that. Usually things are not so clean. I know a lot of the ancient texts say different things. Like some say, like Og hitched a ride on the boat. He was brought over. Some people talk about a theory, because it says that they were on the earth in those days, both before and after. So they acknowledge them before and after. So it's like, how did we get there? So, could have some survived? Possibly. But I've heard some people say, oh, well, then you're saying God's a failure. God doesn't fail. He brought the flood to wipe them out. So if he didn't wipe them out, therefore God's a failure. So that can't be correct. Well, we don't know God's intention. We assume he meant to wipe them out. But if God's intention was not to wipe them out, what if God's intention was to level the playing field? That, because it says that Noah was the only righteous in the original Hebrew, tamim. And every time that word is used, it's talking about the purity of the sacrifice, the purity of the blood of the sacrificial animal. Because it says Noah was the only tamim in his generations. So it's talking about his genealogy, not his righteousness. A righteous man don't get pissed drunk, every day and pass out naked.
That's a fair point.
So it's talking about his
That's
genealogies.
a fair point.
So you got to think about that. Everybody in the world at that point in time, their bloodline was corrupted by this fallen angel DNA, and they were at war with God's people. So he had to protect that bloodline for the coming Messiah. So what if it wasn't to wipe them all out? What if it was just to level the playing field and give that bloodline a fighting chance of survival? And so, and then some legends say that Noah's second wife that was brought through the flood was Naamah, and had Nephilim bloodline to hers. And when when Ham rebelled, it said he uncovered his father's nakedness. Well, Leviticus tells you to sleep with thy father's wife is to uncover thy father's nakedness.
Right.
So sleeping with her resulted in the birth of Canaan. That's why Canaan was a cursed race. He was inbred. He was a cursed lineage from the beginning. So some probably made it through on that side of the coin. Did maybe some other angels continued to rebel and sow more seed? You know what I'm saying? I think it's a mixture of all these different things. And Derek Gilbert also brings up another good possibility in some of his books. He talks about a lot of these people did ancestor worship, just like the Viking berserkers. They would pray, and sacrifice and take, DMT and different, hallucinogenic drugs to channel their spirits of their fallen ancestors, to embody them. And that's how the berserkers, was crazy wild men and didn't fear death, because they were possessed by the mighty warriors of their ancestors. So he even says that, maybe through some occult, ritual type stuff like that, maybe some people was ultimately, possessed by these Nephilim spirits. So, I mean, it's kind of muddy with a lot of different possibilities. So, maybe it's a smorgasbord of all those things,
Fair enough. Yeah, that's always been one that's bothered me, because the prevailing teaching obviously is that these guys died out and then suddenly they're here again. We don't know where they just popped up, and
I love
nobody
that.
at least is do what?
I love that, the lisp and all. I love
it. Nobody addresses like, oh, we don't know where they came from. These things were there, but we have no clue how this happened. And like, I'm okay not knowing stuff, but let's at least acknowledge that we don't know what we don't know, And
or at least throw out theories and feel free to speculate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Like reading your book was the first time I'd heard about Gog, like stowing away in the ark. That was the first time I had heard that theory. And I was like, okay, that could hold some water potentially. And so, I mean, there are a lot of theories around that. And you're right. And all of them could be true. But let's at least A, open ourselves up to the possibility, and B, not be so arrogant as to think that
We got to know it all.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. So, okay, we have the Rephaim on the earth after the flood for whatever reason, and then we move, fast forward a couple hundred years to Abraham and Isaac, and eventually Jacob and Esau, right? And so I know in your book you talk about some genetic aberrations that lead to the kind of hairiness that is associated with Esau. A, can you kind of describe those? And also B, is it possible that those, one of the things Stephen from the Biblical Hitman will say pretty regularly is like, there's the physical, the subphysical, and the metaphysical has a lot of influence over the subphysical and the physical. Are there spiritual changes or things that could happen that could ultimately affect the physical manifestation of the DNA of a being, such that it creates somebody like Esau, this red, hairy, wild man,
I'm not a geneticist. I mean, the possibility has to be there, but I just thought it was particularly strange that all these other texts were painting him as this serpent seed, but then even in our own canon, he's obviously, they're depicting him not as a human. I mean, and it wasn't poetic language like I was brought up. No, he
Right.
was literally so hairy. His brother had to murder a goat and cover himself in it like a blanket to fool their blind father. You're never going to
Right.
pet a damn goat and mistake it to be a human.
100%. Everybody glosses over that. Like nobody talks
Yes.
about that. The fact that they had to essentially just glue fur onto him to make him feel like Esau. Like that is so outlandish. And people just accept that as at face value. Like it's insane. Sorry, go on.
Oh yeah. And so when I researched this out, I wanted to try to look at all angles and put all the cards on the table. And so I was like, is there anything in science that alludes to this kind of phenomenon? And when I got to looking, it sure enough does. And it kind of blew my mind, honestly, because you hear about, werewolves or the wolf man, and all these other things, but most people just hear them and think they're just wild stories or fake freak show attractions and things like that. But no, it's real. And science has observed it. They've studied it, documented it, and they call it hypertrichosis. Is when a person is born covered in hair from head to toe. And if you ever look it up, man, there's some wild documented cases, and they look like werewolves. Some of them have, more hair than others. Some are covered, just maybe from their upper body or maybe their lower, and then some are all over. But they look wild, and there's been a lot of them documented, and that's where you get all the stories of the wolf man, of the bearded lady, because these people that were born this way, if they were fortunate enough to not be murdered as an infant or just left out in the wilderness to be eaten by a wild animal because they thought it was a demon baby, made it into freak shows and side attractions. And there was a lot of them documented throughout history. And one of them that was pretty famous that I wrote about in the book was a guy named Pedro. I think it was Gonzalez, but I think he was from Spain, and he was given to the king as a gift. And he was given to them, I think, when he was like 8 to 10 years old. He was a young boy. But luckily for Pedro was that this king loved him like a son. He didn't treat him like a sideshow freak. He loved him like a son. So he got his own place at court, had his own chambers, dressed in the finest clothes. He sent him to the finest schools. He actually went to school to be a lawyer. On the king's deathbed, he wrote it in his will that he arranged a marriage with this woman named Elizabeth, gave him a piece of land, a title, a castle, set him up, because he knew it'd be hard for him to have a normal life. So they had the arranged marriage and everything. And they got all kinds of paintings of this guy, Pedro. And he looks kind of like the guy from Teen Wolf, like what's his name's dad.
Yeah.
And his wife, Elizabeth, they got together and they had 3 children. And 2 of the 3 had this hypertrichosis, covered in hair. And it was 2 little girls, and they're depicted in pink dresses, but covered in hair.
Right.
So that kind of blew my mind. And then I found out that we are all covered in that hair inside the womb. We all are. But there's something in our DNA programmed to tell us to shed the hair before we're born. And so they say it's some kind of genetic malfunction. And so I was like, well, God makes everything perfect. If there's some kind of malfunction in the DNA, it's because there's been a corruption inserted.
Right.
And I think it is that corruption that we've been talking about today, because geneticists will tell you any kind of mutation or whatever, they're all random. And they're random mutations. You don't know what you're going to get. So it's like when the fallen angels inserted their piece to the puzzle, it manifests in different various, malfunctions, so to speak. So it could be elongated heads. It could be giantism. It could be that they're covered in hair from head to toe. I think all these little, genetic malfunctions that we see are due to that initial corruption in the garden in Genesis 6.
Ooh, that tracks. Yeah. And they always paint that in modern science like it's these random genetic mutations, and then the ones that pay off, for their offspring are the ones that are passed on. But to me, it almost makes more sense for those to be a result of some kind of, I don't want to say spiritual tampering per se, but some kind of aberration on like a metaphysical level that manifests itself outwardly eventually, like
and they can
potentially
skip
with Esau.
generations.
Right.
And I thought that was funny too. Even in that Teen Wolf movie, he says that. If you remember, he's going through the change. He runs up in his bedroom. You remember, it's full moon. His dad's beating on the door, demanding him to open the door, and he's like, "Fine." He slings open the door, but there's his dad, fully wolfed out too.
Right.
And you remember, he's like, "Dad, you knew the whole time. You didn't tell me." And he says, "Son, I'm sorry. Me and your mother was hoping that this skipped you. Sometimes this thing tends to skip generations, and we were hoping that it skipped you." And I'm like, there you go. It kind of proves my little theory. I hate to use a Hollywood movie, but I mean, they throw out truths right in front of your face, I think,
all the time.
sometimes.
Yeah, 100%. And so we have this depiction of Esau as essentially like a Yeti, a Bigfoot is the way he, and especially your commentary on it, it makes total sense. Like this hairy guy who's out in the field hunting, doing all of these things. Do you think it is his bloodline that is being talked about to this day? Like when people discuss cryptids, seeing, Yetis and some of the telepathic abilities of these things people talk about. Do you think that's what folks are interacting with? Or do you think that's something fundamentally different now, however many odd thousands of years later?
I think it's the same, but once again, I think you get the physical mixed with the spiritual also, because Esau, when he has his, birthright taken from him, he basically goes into full rebellion. It says, the book of Genesis says he takes 3 wives. And thanks to people like Gary Wayne that dove through the boring genealogies, we know that 2 out of the 3 were Canaanites, and they were Horites and Hivites. And through Gary Wayne's work, we know that scripture documents that those were Nephilimic bloodlines. They were giant tribes. So here you have this hairy, quote unquote, man marrying into and interbreeding with Nephilim giant clans, right?
Right.
And one of his father-in-laws mentioned is a guy named T.V.R, and he reigns from the land of Mount Seir. And when you get into the etymology of that word, that means rough, ruddy, and hairy. So even their name is a describing factor of these people groups. They are feral giants covered in hair. And Esau, who's also a huge man, big enough, he doesn't speak to his heights, but he was big enough and strong enough, according to the book of Jasher, to not only King Nimrod, who was depicted as a giant, but it says he also killed 2 of his Giborim, which is the same word used to describe the Nephilim giants in the Old Testament. So he takes out 3 of these giants single-handedly in combat, if we're to believe that story. And he was known in scripture, our canon, as the mighty hunter, the same title that Gilgamesh and Nimrod had. So when he interbreeds with these people groups here, from his loins we get Eliphaz, and from Eliphaz we get Amalek, who gets an entire race of people and tribe named after him, the Amalekites. And their name, the etymology, means the blood lickers. And according to all the ancient extra biblical literature, the medieval Rabbi Rashi and his commentaries, and Ginsburg, Legends of the Jews, all of these stories collaborate and say that this people group were known sorcerers and shapeshifters. That's why this group here is the only group in the text, the biblical canon, that says to kill every man, woman, child, and animal.
Right.
Because they were known shapeshifters. And if you remember, these are the first people that has interactions with God's people in their wilderness wanderings when they leave Egypt. And there's where you get all your laws. They're told to not sacrifice their children to the fires of Molech. They're told not to drink the blood. Their name means blood lickers, folks. They're told no longer will they sacrifice to what? To hairy goat demons. Where the book of Isaiah says the wild men, the satyrs, will dance in the desolate cities and in the wilderness. No longer would they seek necromancers and sorcerers. So I think all these laws and rules given to God's people were because obviously they were starting to do them and mimic them because they were seeing it from these Amalekites. And so that's why God had to move in and say, no, you can't be doing all this kind of stuff. So I tell people, I'm like, could there be a remnant of this bloodline left? You know, the ultimate predator traversing the cave systems and things like that and avoid being detected. And maybe that's where we get the stories of the Kandahar giant or the occasional, you know, Bigfoot print and all this stuff. I think it's what the ancients would have called a feral giant.
Right.
And they were Nephilimic. So we know from the book of Enoch that when they die, their spirits remain to what? To torment mankind till the end of time. So some of the woo-woo stories we get, where we see them like shadow figures coming in and out of portals and mind speaking, doing all this woo stuff, the orbs. I don't think it's out of the question if we look at it through that context. If these are the dead spirits of those people, they were known sorcerers and shapeshifters. They were known to be tall giants covered in hair. Is it out of the question that they would, you know, assume a familiar form while here tormenting mankind, as scripture says that they would do anyway?
Yeah.
So I think that little theory of mine, it kind of weaves both of those worlds together if it's to be believed.
Yeah. And it's such an important point that you just made in like the context of like, you know, God's law, like, you know, kind of restricting how they interact with these things. Cause it's like a lot of the modern church, I think sometimes just looks at the law as this like kind of oppressive kind of linchpin that doesn't make really any sense. Right. And like no one really ever like gives it a lot of consideration because, you know, much of the Old Testament gets ignored. But it's like when you think about it, it really wasn't that. Right. There was a context to it, and it was, you know, set up so that, you know, Israel had this way that they, you know, could interact with God, and it would shut out all of these things that would prohibit that. And man, like that was a very important point that you just made about that.
Oh,
I
yeah,
didn't even
thank
think
you.
about when I was reading. I didn't even think about that when I was reading the book.
Dude, yeah, it's such a good point because like they must have seen, at least in the short term, potentially favorable results from what the Amalekites or whatever population it is that they were interacting with, what they were doing, be it sacrificing children, sorcery, whatever it happens to be. Like these people weren't, you know, they must have seen what they you know, appeared to be at the time positive things coming from these, you know, these sorceric, these occult practices that these people were engaging in. It's like, you know, your 9-year-old, you know, wanting to just continually eat cookies. Like you can keep doing that, but you're going to get the diabetes. Same thing. Like God puts laws around them to keep them from, you know, being cut off from Him ultimately. That makes it gives so much more context to what seems now fundamentally irrational. Some of the laws that come through the Old Testament. I mean, they do.
Yeah.
But that makes them make sense.
And you see their migration patterns. That's something I talked about in the book too, is because I think when Joshua, Caleb, and the boys were coming through cleansing the Holy Land, the smart ones were like, they brought down Jericho just by walking around it and screaming.
Right.
Yeah.
They just took out AI. We're getting the hell out of here.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So they packed their shit and went north. And the ones that were, you know, with the Phoenician tribes, they were known seafaring people. They were masters at sea. I think a bunch of them went west and ended up in the New World. Some of them migrated north. Like when you get to the island of Sardinia, they call it the island of the giants. They got these huge megalithic structures. They have these huge tombs that's in the shapes of bull's heads, and you can't even see what they are till you get in the air and look down. And these were the chambers of the giants. But every year during the winter solstice, they have this festival, and the men wrap themselves in black goat's fur, and they carve a wooden mask and put on their face. And just like the book of Isaiah says, the wildmen, the satyrs, will dance in the desolate cities and the wilderness. These men draped in this black goat's fur, like Esau, like Jacob had to do to fool his blind father.
Yeah.
They dance through the streets. They strap hundreds of copper bells on their backs too, and they dance through the streets and chase and abduct women. Of course, now it's PG. They just chase them and, and play.
Sure.
But I'm sure it wasn't always like that.
Yeah.
And so it mimics these people. I think this people group, this group of feral giants that we've been talking about today. And when you ask them, they don't know why they do it. They're like, oh, it's archaic. We've been doing it forever. I mean, we got guesses why we do it, but we really don't know. But during this same time, the children that are coming of age as like a ritual, like a bar mitzvah, they light this huge bonfire. And at the coming of age, to prove themselves, the children must pass through the fire, just like the children that they took and passed through the fire of Molech. I think all this stuff is echoing back to this same people group. And then you get up in Europe, you have Krampus, you have all the stories of the wild woast, the wood woast, the wild men. All these things rhyme for a reason, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, all those legends, all those mythologies, they all just so happen to agree with one another, and nobody had, people are just like, oh yeah, that's just people making shit up, which for me doesn't make any rational sense. Why would all these people, seemingly separated by a lot of time and a lot of space, make up the same if they weren't all seeing the same thing? Like, you could even see that in modern literature, like C.S. Lewis, Lloyd Alexander. A lot of these people whose writings are based off of a lot of those legends have a lot of those mythological figures in them. C.S. Lewis being a prime example. Like, you've got a bunch of satyrs, fauns, you've got nymphs, you got Bacchus, you've got Silenus within those books. We don't talk about it a lot, but they're all in there. They're all heavily featured in those books even now. But it doesn't occur to a lot of people, seemingly like it does you, to trace that back to its source, which is this weird, demonic, hairy goat man. And that's absolutely wild. The other big thing I'm curious about here, though, because this is the first time I've heard anybody mention this particular narrative, are some of these talismans that I had never noticed made their way through scripture, particularly the cloak that you describe as Lucifer's priestly garments that were then handed down to Adam. How did you even come across that thought? And can you talk a little bit about that narrative? Because I think that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I stumbled across that because, like I said, when I had read the story of Esau fighting Nimrod, that was strange in itself. But I noticed that once he killed them, there was another hunting party that heard the ruckus and come running. So he just killed the king. He's killed the president. You know what I mean? He's on the run. The Secret Service is going to be after him. But he takes the time, it says, to steal Nimrod's garments. And it says into these garments to which he was able to prevail over all the nations. So these garments were so important that while he was being chased, threatened with death, probably sustained life-threatening injuries by fighting these three Gibborim to the death single-handedly, has an army coming after him, but he takes the time to take these garments. And then it takes the time to specify that he was a mighty man because of these garments.
Right.
I was like, what are these garments?
Yeah.
And so you keep going in Jasher, and it tells you that these were the supernatural garments from the garden of God that was given to Adam. And I was like, okay. And then immediately Ezekiel 28 popped into my head. There, it's a condemnation to the king of Tyre, but everyone agrees that he's talking to the spiritual entity behind the king, because the wording changes. He's like, you were in the garden of God. Well, the king of Tyre wasn't in the garden of God.
Right.
And, he says, you were perfect in all your ways till iniquity was found in you, and you were cast from the mountain of God as a profane thing. I'm like, this is Satan.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, every precious stone, was your covering. And it says beryl, onyx, topaz, jasper. And I was like, oh my God, this sounds like the priestly ephod.
Right.
And then when you get to look in the Masoretic texts, lists 9 stones, but the Septuagint lists 12. So I was like, they're painting Satan in a priestly role here.
Yeah, why do
And
you think that is? Just as a side, real quick, because I kind of wondered, like, what do you think the reasoning is for the difference between the two, or if you've ever explored it
the listing of the stones?
Yeah, between the Masoretic and the Septuagint.
Honestly, from my experience, what I've noticed through people like Doug Van Dorn, a lot of the Masoretic texts have been messed with and altered to obfuscate and point away from Christ.
Right.
A lot of this, that's why Jesus, talked about the lying pen of the scribes, because they go back and they alter stuff to force their agendas or their ideologies. Because during the time of the writing of Hebrews, they were comparing Jesus to Melchizedek. They were saying that he was, basically. They said that Jesus was the second Adam. Adam was the first high priest, first king and priest of creation. He screwed it up. So Jesus was the second Adam. They said we no longer have need of a priest because now we have Jesus sitting as the high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Well, we see in the Masoretic texts that when you compare the lifeline of who I'm trying to think here, of Seth, or I'm sorry, no, Shem. Shem has like a couple hundred extra years of life in the Masoretic text versus the Septuagint, because, and you can prove it, because like Doug Van Dorn had told me, the oldest manuscripts that they have found has him several hundred years younger. So the Masoretic texts have later added all this time to Shem's life. Well, why? Because during the time of the writing of the Hebrews, everybody was pointing to Jesus, and they were like, oh, no, because they were rejecting Jesus. So they added several hundred years to Shem's life to have him alive during the time that Abraham has his encounter with Melchizedek, so that the Jewish people could point to Shem and say, no, Shem, that was Shem. Melchizedek was Shem. Shem was the high priest. It wasn't Jesus. So therefore, our genealogies show you. They lied. They extended the years of his life to point away from Jesus, the one they rejected as Messiah. So a lot of times, I'm not saying there is no perfect translation. I'm not saying that at all, but I like to compare the two. And a lot of times I lean more heavily into the Septuagint than the Masoretic texts.
Yeah, because it's interesting. The same thing happens. I can't remember where in Isaiah, in one of like the now messianic prophecies, where it's talking about Jesus's birth, where the Masoretic's heavily different in talking about like being born of I think it's being born of a woman and born of a virgin. I think it's the change, if my memory serves me correct. That's really interesting. It's really interesting that most of the English Bible Old Testaments are rooted in the Masoretic text too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so when I was reading that with Ezekiel 28, I was like, okay, they're painting Satan in this priestly role. But then if you keep going, it removes all doubt, because it even it says he has a sanctuary. It says you profaned your sanctuaries. So not only is it painting Satan in a priestly role, it's saying he had a sanctuary in heaven and he profaned it.
Right.
So then I started thinking, I'm like, well, it's saying that he was in heaven and he was basically the high priest. He was the overseer. And I'm like, so what if Satan was like the king and priest over, creation, and was the high priest in the heavenly temple? Because we're told, on earth as it is in heaven, the temple on earth was to mirror the heavenly temple, and things like that. So it tracks there. So I was like, well, what if he was, and at his being cast down was demoted, and dominion and priesthood was given to humanity, to Adam, and that was the garment that was given to Adam. And that's what we're talking about here in the book of Jasher. And I thought I had this, revolutionary idea, guys. And then when I got to searching up the legends of the Jews and some of these other ancient extra biblical books, they say that exactly. They spell it right out and say it. They say that the skins given to Adam was the coverings of the Nachash, And we know by Ezekiel 28 what those coverings were. Every precious stone was his covering.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh my God, okay, it's cool. I mean, it verifies my idea, but at the same time, it kind of took some wind out of my sails because I was like, I thought of it. You know?
Yeah, that's a tough moment.
Yeah. It's like that time I thought I invented spicy ketchup, then I seen Heinz had some. I was like, damn it.
Yes. That happened to me the first time I put sriracha and mayo together, and I was like, damn it, this is yeah, I get that. It's tough. Yeah. Sorry to
Yeah.
hear that. That's
I recovered, but because after I let my ego, after I licked my wounds, let my ego heal, I was like, hey,
right.
that just shows that your idea you had is probably right because other people held it too. So maybe, maybe the Holy Spirit's, kind of led you to that and then let you see all these other ancient texts and writings affirming the same thing to let you know you're on the right path. So
yeah, you can take that as a little bit of an ego boost there. Yeah, it's not so bad.
yeah, you got to lick your wounds every once in a while. God knows, we all like an attaboy every once in a while. So I just took it as an attaboy.
That is nice every now and then. 100%.
Ladies, take notes.
Please. With like a kind word every so often, just once every month or two. Man, that's so just this cloak, this garment appeared to imbue people with almost like supernatural abilities, so to speak, up until, and you kind of draw through the book, you kind of draw the line of the garment until I think, was it Elisha? When Elisha picked up Elijah's garment after he like splits the waters.
Yeah, see, I kind of followed
Kings?
that, and I was like,
Kings,
yeah, I think
whatever it
we
is.
see those garments there, and it says that Noah had them, but then at Ham's rebellion, if you remember, it says that Shem and Japheth take a garment,
Right.
place on their shoulders, walk backwards, and cover their father's nakedness. Well, the original languages has a definite article assigned to it. It says that they took the garment. So I think that's that garment there. And we know that Joseph gets a coat of many colors, right? Beryl, onyx, topaz, jasper. That'd be a multicolored covering for sure.
It's pretty
But
rainbow.
it says that when he puts it on, though, all this supernatural stuff starts happening. He says the wheat of the field bowed before him, the stars of heaven, which was the angels, bowed before him. And he's like, you, my brothers, will bow before me. And that's when they decide to get rid of him. And they trade him off to Egypt, and they take his garment and they dip it in blood and return it to their father and say, this is all that's left of your son, And I speculate, I'm like, could that event with Elijah and Elijah be that garment? Because he's taken up in a whirlwind. The only thing that's left is his mantle. It says that Elijah picks it up, he smacks the Jordan River with it, and the waters part, and he walks across on dry land. I'm like, those garments seem pretty supernatural to me.
A little bit.
But it wasn't until after I produced the book that I had talked with Zen Garcia, and he wrote a book just on the garments and rod. It's called The Supernatural Rod of Wonder and the Vestures of Light, I think is what it was called. And so I'd already, produced the book and everything, but I had to interview with him, and we talked about some stuff, and he gave me his book, and I got to reading through it. He laid out a pretty good theory that when Christ comes back, it says that he comes back, on this white steed with the sword, the flaming sword, and everything. It describes this ornate garment that he has on. And it says that on the thigh, it says Lord of Lords, King of Kings. So he's the second Adam, according to the book of Hebrews. And he comes in the order of Melchizedek. He was the second Adam. Adam was the first king and priest that had the garments and the rod, Moses' rod of wonder. It says that when Christ returns, he has on this beautiful garment, and he has a rod of iron, which he rules the nations. And it says the blood is stained up to the bridle. So I think it's signaling back to Joseph when that garment was dipped in blood. Jesus returns with that garment and rod dipped in blood, because the Jewish people had two messiahs. They had the one, which was Joseph, and they called him Josiah ben Joseph. and they're still waiting on their second one because they reject Christ. So it's kind of like when Christ shows up at the final battle to, like, as a last ditch effort to grab the attention of his stiff-necked people that so firmly believe in this Josiah ben Joseph, to say, hey, look, I'm here, Daddy, repent or die.
Yeah.
I'm here with the garments and with the rod stained in blood, just like, you know, the one that you so strongly believe in. So I'm here now. It's time, repent or die. And that's something Jesus done a lot. He even done it with Moses, I believe. They looked at Moses with such high regard, right? But they rejected him. So he basically stacked his life side by side against Moses to show his stiff-necked people that he was superior in every way, but they still rejected him, because Moses was threatened to be killed by a king, right? And he's sent in a basket into Egypt and is ultimately saved.
Yeah.
Jesus, a king wants to kill him. What happens? They go to Egypt. They flee to Egypt, and he is saved. John the Baptist baptizes Jesus, right? He goes through the water. Moses, he parts the water, goes through the water, and enters into the wilderness and is tempted for 40 years. Jesus, when he goes through the water, he goes into the wilderness and is tempted for 40 days. But where Moses and the Israelites failed, he succeeded. You know, there's just all this, and the serpent on the staff, you know, all who look will be healed. All who look to Jesus will be ultimately healed. So, like, all these different things, I think they done, just trying to every way possible to show his stiff-necked people, you know, that he is the one they need to be looking to, by contrasting himself against the ones they held in such high regard, but they still missed it. You know,
I mean, because even on like the ultimate, like, you know, with Jesus' sacrifice, it's like Moses tried to intercede as a sacrifice for Israel as well. If you look at the story in Exodus 32, when he appeals to God, it's like, hey, let me take their place for their transgression of like the golden calf, like whatever punishment they take, let me take it. I'd never even made that connection really with all that. That's very fascinating.
Yeah, I'll tell you a good book for that. And actually, I might find it on my shelf real quick. Hang on.
Yeah. That is just the amount of the way that those threads become so much thicker with that extra context. Like, it's wild. Yeah. All these different books and concepts that are kind of, honestly, in the Epic of Esau and in, you know, some of the other people's works around this subject, the way that these compilations provide so much more context and reality to the narrative.
There's one of them. I couldn't find the other one. But this one is called Bearing God's Name, Why Sinai Still Matters, by Carmen Joy Imes. The other one I can't find. It's in there somewhere, but I remember the name of it. It was called Reading Moses, but Seeing Jesus. And it was just a book. I mean, it was, you know, about like a comic book. It wasn't too thick, but it was a great read. Highly suggested if you guys are into this stuff we're talking about today.
I'll have to check that out.
Absolutely. Writing those down now. Dang. Yeah, I was just telling John, like, this, the way you and some of the other people who have written books around this topic have kind of taken all of these narratives surrounding what we typically look at as just the single thread of the Bible, right? And kind of compiled them into one cohesive thought makes so much more sense. Because when you look at, to Heiser's point, you know, when you look at these narratives on their own with like the canonical Bible, sometimes they kind of, in a weird way, maybe it's because the Bible's been messed with, maybe we're all just, I don't know, but they seemingly fall apart if you don't have all of this extra context to add to it. They just don't make as much sense.
Because they had it back then. That's something I try to tell people. It's like, this was written by ancient people to ancient people. They wasn't thinking of us thousands of years later. All they had was all these scrolls, and they were all in circulation. Everyone was reading them. They didn't think that, you know, at a certain time that a group of people was going to get together and vote and compile them all and exclude some of these other writings and stories.
Right. Yeah.
So when they wrote Genesis, for instance, I tell people, the giants is a big deal. You know, angels coming down, breeding with the daughters of men, making a hybrid race. That's a big deal.
Yeah, a little bit.
But we just get a blurb.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I want some more context. But it's like, no, the ancient reader wasn't thinking of us thousands of years later. They were like, there's no reason to beat a dead horse. Hell, everybody knows what happened at Genesis 6. We got the scroll of Enoch. We got all these other stories, all these other scrolls. That's a well covered topic. We don't need to beat a dead horse.
Right.
You know, so they wasn't thinking of us that, you know, thousands of years later that there was going to be a one book that reigned supreme and all these other ones was going to be left out. No, that's why I think it's so important that we read these things, because they were reading them. They believed them. It shaped their theology. And so far in my personal experiences, all of the really vague passages of the scripture that kind of left me scratching my head and left me wanting.
Yeah.
Those questions were answered fully when I went to some of these other texts. And I think that's for a reason, because they left it out, because it's like, hell, everybody's done read this story. Everybody knows this.
Right.
So I think a lot of us remain willfully ignorant because we think that our God is scared to be questioned, poked, or prodded. It's like, no, he wants you to, man. That's why the Bible says, knock and the door will be answered. Seek and ye shall find. Ask and it shall be given. That's why Proverbs says it is the glory of God, not the shame, the glory of God to conceal a thing, but is the glory of kings to search things out. Jesus taught in parables. This is an esoteric book, my friends. And he made salvation so easy a child can understand it for a reason, because it's important. This other stuff that we're talking about, it's not detrimental to your faith. But I tell you what, it's detrimental in mine because it puts me in awe of my God and my Creator. You know, where it says the beginning of all wisdom is the the fear of the Lord. That's an English debauchery. If you go back to the original languages, that word means to be in awe. And when I read these texts and I find all this stuff, man, I'm searching these things out, it draws me closer to God. It puts me in awe of God.
Yeah.
And it's such an awe that I've never been before, just staying in my little 66 books and getting my whitewashed version on Sunday. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for that, because, I mean, not everybody's like me. Some people are just comfortable sitting in their 5x5 square and getting their water and feed every day. I have an adventurous heart, man. And God has trails cut through the woods for his people that have adventurous hearts. And I'm so grateful for that.
I cannot think of a better way to close this out, honestly, because that makes so much sense. I found myself kind of in the same place in my own journey, because like one of the things I noticed reading through Enoch specifically was one of the last ones that did this to me, is you read about whether they're angelic beings or whether it's man, and the sheer awe with which they approach the Creator, the sheer just fear and respect, and the amount of just like beauty they seem to experience when they're thinking of and addressing the Creator of the universe. And for me, that is not something, it sounds terrible, but it's not something I've ever received from, like you said it perfectly, like this whitewashed Christianity that we've been handed down. It's not a part of that. And I think there are a lot of people, you know, that are looking for that. They're looking for the awe that's described in the biblical text, but that we're not given in this whitewashed, sterile version that we're handed at our country club on Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you perfectly outlined that search for, the awe and the wonder. That makes so much sense. So much sense. Awesome. Well, Justin, thank you for taking the time, man. This has been phenomenal.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
I do want to ask one more question, because I didn't get to it earlier in the show. So when I was reading the book, I kept thinking in the back of my mind about John the Baptist, because it's like you listen to like the description of Esau and just kind of how crazy he's described, right? Obviously, you know, in the physical description that like Jacob covers his skin in goat fur, right, to like masquerade as Esau. And then obviously John the Baptist is like wore camel skin is how he's described in Matthew. But you also have like the significance of like the phrase in the wilderness. That's how John the Baptist was always described, as being in the wilderness, before the coming of the Lord. And it's like the one thing Michael Heiser definitely taught me is like, if a phrase shows up time and time and time again, it's important. So it's like, I kind of wonder, especially because you made such a really good point in like, hey, God didn't just write like these people off, right? That he did kind of still try and offer them a path to redemption. Is there something that like John the Baptist kind of plays in that, of being like, he kind of has this like wild man persona or description, and like he's in the wilderness up until like preaching the coming of the Messiah? Is like, have you looked into any like connection there? Because it was the thing that was in the back of my mind the entire time reading the book.
No, it wasn't until after I done released the book, I had some people approach me and talk about some of the wording used to describe his hairy mantle.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to know, could this have been the priestly ephod that you talk about in the book?
Yeah.
And I was like, I've never thought of that, But one thing that far as like imagery, and symbolism kind of thing, I think we can definitely see that the Edomites, they dwelled in the wilderness. They were kind of outcasted, just like at the Tower of Babel, the dividing of the nations. Jesus symbolically cancels that when he goes to Mount Hermon and he chooses to transfigure there.
Yeah.
Because if you pay attention to the wording there, after this happens, he sends out his 70 disciples to preach the gospel unto all the nations. Well, there was 70 nations listed at the Tower of Babel. There were 70 sons of El that ruled with him in his divine council from Mount Hermon. So it was like signaling a reversal of the Tower of Babel, and he was going back to reclaim all the nations. And then later, Pentecost, right? The tongues of fire came down. He spoke in his language to all these different people that were there for that holy pilgrimage. So many nations and tongues were represented there, but it said all understood his message in their own tongue. So once again, God was signaling the reversal of the Tower of Babel and reclaiming all the people. Preach the gospel unto all creatures. In some translations, if you want to look at it like that.
Yeah.
So I think we could easily see that, some symbology there, that even from out of the wilderness, chaos, order and chaos, the wild man has its role to play in the unification back into the family of God. I think you could easily make that case.
That makes a lot of sense. I even saw somebody in the chat mention like how it doesn't have anything to do with our bloodline, right? Salvation doesn't have anything to do with our bloodline. And I wonder if there's some of that, like you're talking about, like the reclamation of perhaps some of these people who are in the wilderness, so to speak, maybe.
Yeah, because I mean, even in I think this is in Legend of the Jews, like Noah's depicted as like not only like the preservation of humanity, but he's also kind of depicted as a prophet, if I'm not mistaken, that he goes and still tries to preach righteousness and redemption to like the wickedness on the earth. And like calling that, hey, like this is coming, repent, right? I think you see kind of the same thing in First Peter chapter 3, where it says that like Jesus goes and ministers to the spirits in prison, right? Like there's still that call to repentance, and that like, hey, this isn't completely done for you, but it's like it's on you to kind of come back into it, and like, right, it puts it back on the choices that you make.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, it's not about the bloodline. I think the bloodline can have an influence, just like I said earlier. If you come from a family, a long line of alcoholics and drug abusers, you have a higher chance of becoming a drug addict, or an alcoholic because of your bloodline. But you're not doomed to that. You have a choice. It might be harder for you than most people, with all your, preconditions.
Yeah.
But the bloodline, what do they call it? The generational curses is not what damns you. It's your ultimate free will choice, just like Cain. I think Cain was a serpent seed, man, 100%. But his father, his DNA didn't damn him. God reasoned with him and said, hey, man, if you do well, will you not succeed? These inclinations and emotions and things you're dealing with now are not your own. you must rule over them. So, yeah, if it was just bloodlines that damned them, he wouldn't have done that. And I'm having a brain fart on his name now. Forgive me. Forgive me, guys.
Are you good, dude?
You hit 40 years old, your brain turns to mush. But
That's
this
what they all
man
keep
right
telling
here
me.
that wrote this book, and why don't he have his name on the front?
It's
Daggone it.
terrible marketing.
Dang it, he's gonna kick my butt. I've had him on the show a couple times, but look him up. Five Stones. This is a great comic book, that he wrote. But I've had him on the show, and he's talked about some other things. He gets into David and the mighty men and stuff.
Yeah,
and he's shown through tracing, genealogies and things like that, that even some of the Edomites and some of this cursed lineage worked for King David, helped David. Some of even helped and served in the temple. So even those people, recorded in the Bible, if you know how to look at it and dig through the genealogies, even these, damned people, these damned bloodlines, served for the purposes of God, and God used them. So, I mean, there's redemption for all. We all have the free will choice, in my opinion.
love that. That gave me the warm fuzzies. Yeah. I mean, that's such a positive message, because you wonder, I mean, reading some of these stories about some of these bloodlines of people who were, as the Bible describes them, very evil. And some of these generational curses, even in what is it, Proverbs, where it talks about bad deeds or bad parents. I can't remember where that is, being visited for 7 generations. That offers you the opportunity of redemption, of making the right choices, of choosing God over everything else, and not having to, experience a life of eternal damnation if you make the choice. And sure, in a modern world, it's not nice for, people don't like the idea that it may be harder for some people than others, but that's just a fact. It is going to be harder for some people than others. And that's okay, because you still have the option. You still have the option, people. And that's
Adam Ferris.
So massive. What was that name again?
Adam Ferris. Sorry, Adam.
I'm going to write that down. I'm going to get a copy of that.
Yep, he'd be a good to have on your show. He talks about the lion-faced men of Moab, the Nephilim lines, the giant clans that were some of their lineages served in the temple. Some of them served under King David as his Gibor, his mighty men. He's a real good researcher and good conversation. I think you guys would enjoy.
Yeah,
just don't tell him I forgot his name.
Oh yeah, no, we'll keep that a secret.
Yeah,
he'll never see this.
Yeah, will do. Well, man, thank you again for taking the time.
Awesome.
Yeah, this has been phenomenal. I know you've got a busy day ahead. We don't want to keep you too long. You want to tell the people where they can find you again?
Yeah, if you guys enjoy this kind of stuff, check me out, Prometheus Lens Podcast. You can find me anywhere you can consume content. The website's PrometheusLensPodcast.com. Get you a signed copy with some custom stickers and bookmarks and stuff like that too. And if you guys are not busy, in the next 5 to 10 minutes, I will be starting a live over at my channel every Sunday night. We usually do it at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard, but we're going to be doing it at 6 this week. But we go through every single week. We have a live study of Louis Ginsburg, Legends of the Jews. We're now on part 24 or 25. So I got that going on here just a little bit over on my channel. And then if you're still not busy, you want to hang out with me some more, if you're just a glutton for punishment, me and a bunch of my buddies were getting together and doing I guess you could call it a watch party, but we can't broadcast it on the live feed. But we will be watching the UFC fight night at the White House to see if any aliens show up during this event. And we're going to be covering it live. So we're going to be watching the fight and talking about it and having a good time too. So we'll be doing that at 8 o'clock Eastern too.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah, go check out that. Scan the QR code in the top left corner to link to all of Doc's work. It's all incredible.
Yeah, and go get a copy of the Epic of Esau. It's fantastic, folks.
Yeah, buy it from him, not from Amazon.
Yeah.
I bought it from Amazon, and I feel bad about
John, you dick.
I
What a dick.
I feel bad about it. I apologize.
Yeah, shame. I rebuke you.
You got to do it in the Karen voice.
That's right. How dare you? We don't buy from Amazon here.
Yeah.
We buy from good people.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm about to bring you guys over, and we'll pick a topic you guys are researching or well versed on. We hang out over at my crib.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely.
Would love to.
Absolutely.
Anytime.
You got to bring
Anytime.
the Karen voice. I want that on a
Absolutely, yeah.
sound bite. I want a
It comes
sound
with
bite
me.
for that.
It comes with me wherever I go.
Yeah.
It's just a part of.
Yeah,
I do it at work. It's going to get me fired one of these days. I mean, yeah, it'll
Yeah,
happen.
it's like a constricted pair of underwear or a new pair of underwear. First, it's a little constricted, but after a while, it becomes a part of you.
Yeah, it kind of is. That's a good description. I've never heard that before. Yeah, it's accurate. 100%. 100%. All right, man. Thanks for doing this again, guys. Thanks for hanging out. It's been fun. Be sure to, if you didn't catch this live for whatever reason, you're just catching the end. We're going to be re-releasing this in about a week. For our Patreon subscribers, hang out after. We'll have our post show very shortly. And then head over to Doc's channel and check out all the live streams coming up today. It's going to be phenomenal. I will be tuning into those myself. Anything else, John?
I think that's good.
All right. Sweet. Well, thanks again, sir. And we'll catch you guys on the next
You
one.
guys having me.